The year is 1936, and it's time for the Olympics. In 1936, Germany invites the world to the Olympic Games, held in Berlin. The government mounts a massive propaganda campaign to convince anyone who comes to the Games that the Jews were suffering no discrimination and that all is well with the Nazis. Joseph Goebbels, the Minister of Propaganda, orders all newspapers to avoid any anti-Jewish remarks. All the anti-Semitic posters and signs were taken down from the walls. All the display cases that had Der Stürmer, the anti-Semitic newspaper, they were all hidden. Houses were whitewashed and painted where the word Juden were written on it. German civilians and government employees were ordered to treat all foreigners, even Jews, with utmost courtesy. The Germans also took care to get rid of the beggars off the street because they didn't want a bad impression to be made and that the Nazis were not proper leaders and taking care of the country. And the strategy succeeded. Now, before the Olympics were held, the United States had to make a decision whether or not they should participate or not. Should they boycott the Olympics? Because this is 1936. The Nuremberg laws were passed in 1935. Everybody knew what the Nuremberg laws said. Everybody knew about the discrimination that was happening in Germany. And so therefore, the United States had to decide whether or not to boycott, to protest the way the Jews were being treated. And not only the United States, but Jewish athletes, whether they were American or from other countries, had to decide whether to participate or not. At the end of the day, everyone participated. But the U.S. decided, and we'll talk about this in a minute, to hold back some of the Jewish athletes from its track team from running. Why? Because just in case they would win, Hitler might have to put the medal on them and at the award ceremony, and they didn't want Hitler to get upset. But the subtle message was Hitler understood that America is not going to stand up for the Jews. And when it was all over, the people came away. All the world that came to participate and witness the 1936 Olympics came away impressed with how a country that was at war just a few decades before, World War I, or at that time known as the Great War, look how they're thriving. They're thriving economically, they're thriving culturally. There's no discrimination against the Jews. Well, there was, but they suspended it for a couple of weeks. And therefore, the Olympics in general was a public relations triumph for Adolf Hitler. Now, boycotting the Olympics is nothing new. Throughout the 20th century, there were countries that have boycotted the Olympics because of political reasons. Well, we're talking about in 1936 with the United States and other countries, they had to decide whether or not they should boycott because of Hitler's discrimination against the Jews. But later on in the century, in 1956, just 20 years later, there was another discussion. And the Olympics were held in Melbourne, and the countries of the Netherlands, Spain, and Switzerland decided they were going to boycott. Why? Because of what was going on in Hungary by the Soviet Union. Cambodia, Egypt, Iraq, and Lebanon boycotted because of the Suez Crisis, which happened in 1956. They decided not to attend. We're not going to be part of any games when there are things going on in the world that we disapprove of. In 1976, the Olympic Committee refused to ban New Zealand because its national rugby team had toured apartheid-ruled South Africa. And because they did not ban the New Zealand team, 20 African countries, Guyana and Iraq, withdrew from the games that were played in Montreal. 65 nations refused to compete at the Moscow Olympics in 1980 because of the Soviet Union invasion of Afghanistan. And in 1984, the Soviet Union retaliated or countered by boycotting the Olympics that took place in Los Angeles, contending they could not guarantee the safety of their athletes. So we see that there have been opportunities and reasons that the Olympics were boycotted. But the 1936 Olympics in Berlin, even though there was a reason that they should be boycotted, most countries decided not to. And the United States decided that its black and Jewish athletes should participate. However, at the last minute, two Jewish athletes by the name of Marty Glickman and Fred Stoller were replaced by black teammates in the 400-meter relay. Why? As we mentioned earlier, as not to embarrass Adolf Hitler in case they won. And as we said as well, Hitler interpreted this as a sign that America would not stand up for its Jews. You can say or do or discriminate against the Jews. It doesn't matter. We're still going to play with you. Jesse Owens, who, as we said, was an African American, the Germans, the Nazis, felt he was racially inferior. He was not an Aryan. He was a black man. He won 4 gold medals, broke 11 Olympic records. He defeated Lutz Lang, a German, in a very close long jump final. Hitler refused to place the gold medal around his neck. The 1936 Berlin Olympic Games was the opportunity for Hitler to demonstrate to the world how efficient Nazi Germany was. They built a new stadium in Berlin, which held 100,000 people. They built buildings just to celebrate the Olympics. They took down all the anti-Semitic posters that were throughout Germany before the games. They gone. They disappeared. And radio, which was the window to the world. Remember, there's no TV yet. This is how the games were broadcast throughout the world. The Nazis gave the opportunity. They gave transmission trucks, vans, and the countries could use them to broadcast the Olympics throughout the world to showcase Germany, Berlin, and the success of the Nazi regime.
It's the same year that summer he stages the Olympics in Berlin, which is a major triumph, clearly, for the so-called Aryan race.
In 1936, the Olympics were held in Berlin. The United States debated whether or not it should even participate. There were Jewish athletes that also had to decide whether or not they would participate. In the end, they joined the American team, but when they came to Berlin, the American track team decided that they would not use Jewish athletes in the games. They were afraid that they would embarrass Hitler if a Jewish athlete won. It sent a subliminal message to Hitler, and the message was, America will not stand up for its Jews. It was a terrible message to send to a lethal madman.
The Olympics was a chance for Germany to show the world what it had accomplished. And people came away from the Olympics enthralled by what they saw. They didn't see people being beaten up. They didn't see Jews being persecuted. They saw a country where people were working. They saw a country where nobody was selling apples on the street, as was still the case in the United States. They saw new buildings. They saw a grand and glorious operation. And they came back and they said, we didn't see anybody be persecuted. What is this all about? Of course, the persecution had gone underground for the duration of the Olympics.
Compared to the many unemployed people in the streets in the United States still in the mid-1930s, Germany appeared to be better economically in every way. And when people left the games and they come back, or the broadcasts of what was going on in Germany through the radio, they said, what discrimination against the Jews? We were in Berlin. We saw what was going on. There's no discrimination against the Jews. And as we said, this was a PR triumph for Adolf Hitler.
They were days of glory and gold.
If I could use a single word to describe Berlin during that period of time, the word would be carnival.
As U.S. sprinter Marty Glickman remembers it, the view was grand for those 2 weeks in August of 1936, as Berlin hosted the world's greatest athletes for the 11th Olympic Games. International visitors were warmly welcomed, but behind the pomp and pageantry were ominous signs.
The swastika was all over. On virtually every other banner we saw, there was a swastika.
The benefit of hindsight and history helps us see these were more than just games.
These weren't the Berlin Olympics. These were the Nazi Olympics.
They were also an opportunity for the regime to create the illusion of a new Germany on the world stage. But the reality was quite different. Jews were excluded from all German sports teams and clubs, but the Nazis put Jewish international track and field star Gretel Bergmann on the Olympic roster to fend off international critics. Removed from the German team at the last minute, Margaret Lambert, as she is now known, recalls her reaction.
I would have been a loser either way. Because had I won, that would have been such an insult against the German psyche. How can a Jew be good enough to win the Olympics? That I would have had to be afraid for my life, I'm sure. And had I lost, I would have been made as a joke.
Off the field, the truth about what the Nazis were doing was hard to miss.
Many Americans could open their newspapers, and on the front page they could see stories about what was going on in Nazi Germany, so it certainly wasn't a secret.
By 1936, Germany's Jews and other minorities had been stripped of their civil rights, even their citizenship, and the Nazi regime had already opened its first concentration camps.
Everybody knew early on exactly the kind of regime Nazi Germany was, so much so that for the first time in the history of the modern Olympic Games, there was talk about boycotting these games.
The debate raged.
They're all trying to decide what to do. Should they go? Did that mean that they would be somehow putting a stamp of approval on a regime that many people felt was abhorrent? Or was it just a sporting contest?
In the end, 49 nations, including the United States, came to Berlin for the Nazi Olympics and watched as Aryan athletes followed in the footsteps of the ancient Greeks, bringing fire from Mount Olympus in the first ever Olympic torch relay.
The torch run relay was the perfect event for them, and they had such a superb propaganda machine that they were able to exploit it in every way to get the maximum propaganda value out of it.
Popular history remembers Jesse Owens' 4 gold medals, and Olympic first, as a triumph over the myth of Aryan supremacy. But a closer look reveals an Olympic victory for Nazi Germany's propaganda campaign as well.
This was a major corruption of the Olympic ideals, and this was a total propaganda victory for the Nazis. This was creating an illusion of a peaceful and tolerant nation, and the world wanted to believe this illusion, allowing itself to be completely deceived.
The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum has updated and expanded its special exhibition, The Nazi Olympics, Berlin, 1936. Visitors will see many never-before displayed pieces. The uniforms of the U.S. track stars, the medals awarded to legendary African-American athletes Jesse Owens and Ralph Metcalfe, their souvenirs, and from that first relay, a torch that carried the Olympic flame. With the opening of the Nazi Olympics, Berlin 1936, visitors have a chance to reflect and to remember those games as more than history.
My name is Margaret Lambert. I was born Gretel Bergman in a very small town in the south of Germany. I loved everything that had to do with physical activity, and I was good at it. There was this little club in that town, and you could go as often as you wanted in the afternoon or in the evening. Whoever was ready there, the older people helped the younger people how to do certain things, and it was great. Due to my love for sports, most of my friends were non-Jewish, and that was never, never, never a problem until a certain time in my life.
Social institutions are not established in a vacuum. The Olympic Games, as majestic as they are part and parcel of systems that they are helping to create. The Nazi Olympics was just one stepping stone toward the legitimization of the Nazi regime. And it was one more step toward the Holocaust. By 1935, Jews were excluded from all German sport associations. They were able to establish their own sport associations, but German sport clubs, gymnastic clubs excluded them.
In the spring of 1933, it was just around my birthday, and it was not a very nice birthday present. I got a letter from my sports club. You are no longer welcome here because you're Jewish. Heil Hitler. And that was the end of that. There was no Jewish sports per se in the town. We tried to straighten out an old potato acre that somebody had given us, and we ran there, and I started a field handball. But after a while, everybody got tired of this, the same people every day. It was horrible.
The Germans established an Olympic training camp in Ettlingen. They invited Jewish athletes. None of them were selected to the German team. The two athletes who were selected to the German team were half Jewish. Rudi Ball was perhaps the best hockey players in Germany, and the famous fencer Helena Meyer, a beautiful, tall, statuesque blonde woman who exemplified the Aryan idea of female beauty. The reason that these two half-Jewish athletes were selected was because the extraordinary American pressure to include at least one Jewish athlete. Indeed, we find that Gretel Bergman, who was from Jewish ancestry, fully was dropped from the German team in spite of her very high level of performance.
My candidacy for as an Olympic athlete was really all a sham. It was just something that the Germans did to fool the whole world.
The Jewish American response from the street level was staunchly against the participation in the Olympic Games. When the participation was decided, many Jewish athletes were influenced by community leaders, by rabbis, not to participate in the Olympic Games. Some of them responded to this pressure, some of them decided to go.
I'd been always thinking and wanting to be in the Olympics. In 1936, in the Harvard Yale track meet, Norman Connors and myself had won 6 gold medals between us. And there was quite a bit of publicity about whether we were going to the Olympics or whether we could qualify. I went to Temple Israel in Boston, and Rabbi Levy had seen the publicity, and I had great respect for Rabbi Levy, because prior to our meeting with him, although I had heard about the problems in Germany and what was going on, I didn't really have a detailed understanding of the problems there, and that meeting was really a shocker to both Connors and myself. I don't remember all the gory details that they went into. Something about book burning and taking away the rights of Jews. All those details were pretty repulsive to us. After we boycotted the Olympics, no one came to speak to us or ask us if we'd make any statements about it. And I don't think anyone knew particularly that we did boycott it, because there was no publicity about it one way or the other. At the time of the Olympic Games, I was working at a summer camp as a counselor. I was thinking about how it had been running in those events, and I had a longing to have been in it. But as I look back on it, I don't remember having any terrible regrets for having made the decision. Never a second thought on it.
We were aware of the fact that there was anti-Semitism in Germany. We just didn't know what Nazism was. Remember, this is from the perspective of 2 years before Kristallnacht. The Holocaust was not only not a thought, it didn't exist in our imagination, in our dreams. I was on the team. It was a goal I had sought. Holocaust was a word that I didn't even know in 1936. The 400-meter relay was selected beforehand. Sam Stoller would start. I was to run the second leg. Floyd Draper run the third leg, and Frank Wyckoff run the anchor leg. The morning of the day we were supposed to run in the trial heats, we were called into a meeting, the 7 sprinters were, along with Dean Cromwell, the assistant head track coach, and Lawson Robertson, the head track coach. And Robertson announced to the 7 of us that he'd heard very strong rumors that the Germans were saving their best sprinters, hiding them to upset the American team in the 400-meter relay. And consequently, Sam and I were to be replaced by Jesse Owens and Ralph Metcalf. We were shocked. Sam was completely stunned. He didn't say a word in the meeting. Watching the final, all sorts of emotions flashed through my being. Frustration, certainly. Anger, certainly. I look out on the track and I see Metcalf passing runners down the backstretch. He ran the second leg. And that should be me out there. That should be me. That's me out there. Anti-Semitism was the basic reason, I believe, that Sam and I didn't get to run the Olympic Games. Here were the great black athletes who couldn't be kept off the winning podium. They were marvelous. But here were 2 rather obscure Jewish American athletes who could be kept from the winning podium so as not to further embarrass Adolf Hitler. But what happened to me was as nothing compared to that which took place later on. There was just no comparison. I was there, and that mattered. What took place was much, much more important afterwards.
Hitler attended the finals of the wrestling competition between the German champion and the Hungarian champion. The Hungarian champion happened to be Jewish. Károly Kárpáti beat the German champion decidedly. He was hailed as a national hero in Hungary. Yet during the Holocaust, he was hauled to the Ukraine in a forced labor company, which the Hungarians established, very, very close to the famous Hungarian fencer, Attila Pecsár. He was an Olympic champion who died in the Holocaust. In order to kill a human being, you have to dehumanize first. to create an image which is not human anymore. So you have no compunction, or you have no issue to kill or eliminate. The Olympic Games was a stepping stone of this exclusion. And obviously, the 1936 Games provided the legitimacy to the Nazi regime, which led later toward the final solution.